Today's conversation on the Rupee's Trail marks the inaugural outreach event for this exhibition, Odyssey of the Rupee. And on behalf of all of us at Sarmaya, thank you all for joining us this evening. A little bit about the exhibition. The Indian Republic's Rupee coinage turned 75 this year. And we are thrilled to bring you one of Sarmaya's most ambitious exhibitions, curated by Dr Shailendra Bhandare. The show is a journey across centuries, from ancient punchmark coins to the very first coin minted in independent India. But it's not just about India. The exhibition also traces how the rupee traveled across borders to different countries and regions that we're not very familiar with. Tonight, we have a very special conversation lined up, and joining are Paul Abraham and Dr Shailendra Bhandare. A quick introduction to them. Paul is the founder of Sarmaya Arts Foundation. He's a banker with over 40 years of experience across India, Dubai, and Singapore. But more importantly, he's a passionate collector and an art patron who believes in making art and history accessible to everyone, especially the younger generation. Paul founded Sarmaya in 2015 as a not-for-profit organization that curates and preserves art and artifacts, as well as the living traditions across the Indian subcontinent. Beyond the arts, he's deeply involved in philanthropy and environmental causes, serving as the chairman of the Sanctuary Nature Foundation and sitting on multiple boards. And joining him is Dr. Shailendra Bhandare, the curator of the show and assistant keeper of South Asian and Far Eastern numismatics and paper money collections at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. Born and raised in Mumbai, Dr. Bhandare began his career as a numismatist with a fellowship at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, and later worked with the British Museum on coins of the later Mughals and Indian princely states. His research combines history, numismatics, and cultural studies, offering insights into how coins and currency illuminate wider social, economic, and political histories. Together, Paul and Dr. Bhandare have brought Odyssey of the Rupee to life, not just as an exhibition, but as a story that connects India's past to its present, as well as the global relationships that it holds. This evening, they'll explore not only the broader journey of the exhibition's concept, but more importantly, the discipline of numismatics and how they perceive it and how they study it as an expert, as a historian, as a collector, and as a history enthusiast. We will also open the floor to your questions, so please be ready with them. But before I, of course, give the mic to them, I would also like to point out that this is our first event and it's only the beginning. Our programs team has put together a variety of public engagement programs that stretch from expert lectures to workshops to game nights to even walkthroughs and show and tells. So if you would like to know more about it, we have a small standee that's kept out on the desk. You can just scan the QR code and you'll get the calendar there. So without further ado,
we always, being in Fort, it's a lovely place to be. The context is beautiful. The heritage precinct kind of lends itself to all of this activity. But of late, we also have to deal with the uncertainty of morchas. We had to cancel an earlier talk. Of course, fortunately, we happened to reschedule it soon thereafter because of one large morcha. Today, we were very nervous because there was another one, which luckily, I think between their generosity and not being too troublesome and the general turnout, we've had a reasonable, traffic situation around. So I'm very happy that, we have had no real trouble, all of us getting here, I believe. Hey, thank you for being here. I'm going to, kind of set the tone with a few basic questions, and I will let Shailendra respond to them. First and foremost, his background is by training in pharma. And he ended up having this passion for history in general and numismatics in particular. And what made that switch happen?
It's a good question. What made that switch happen is that, well, I mean, like when you are 15 or 16 or 17 years old, you don't have much idea of what the world is going to throw at you. And I knew that I hated mathematics. And when I was in the 12th standard, what do you do if you hate mathematics? You go to biology. And I was a science student. So instead of a PCM student, I became a PCB student. So what do you do if you're a PCB student? You go to medicine. So that is what I was aspiring to. Actually, my parents, my mother actually told me that there's not much sense in becoming a doctor because we don't have the wherewithal. We don't have, there's no doctor in our family anyway. Why are you becoming this? But I said, I like biology and everything, so on. So as it happened, I missed my medical admission by 1 mark. And I was still getting into Miraj. And I said, okay, well, I'll go to Miraj for a year and then I'll come back. My mom said, no way you are going anywhere out of Bombay. Whatever you do it in front of our eyes. And that's it. So what was the second option? So I went to pharmacy. So that was that.
Okay.
But I was collecting coins. I started collecting coins when I was 6, I believe. And it's sort of very funny that the journey, the coin acquisition of coins started very much on this stretch along DN Road, where there were coin collectors, coin dealers who were selling on the footpath in those days. And my father always enjoyed watching English movies. And so we came to places like Excelsior and Sterling. There was this kind of new empire. They were the hubs of... and as a part of that, I was allowed to rummage through the coins. And at one point, there was like, in those days, it was like charana, 25 paisa, 50 paisa. And there were some coins which were 5 rupees. So wow, this was like, and I think I did something, maybe I got good marks in something or whatever. So my dad one day said, why don't you now today, this is going to be a reward, why don't you select a 5 rupee coin? So I said, okay, fair enough. So I selected one, we took it home. My grandfather was there and he said, oh, look, this is a Shivrai. And I said, what does that mean? So he said, these coins were, my grandfather was incidentally born in 1888. So he said, when I was about 10 years old, these coins were around and we used to get them as cheap substitutes for giving dakshina. So if your priest is coming home, then for 1 British rupee, you get 64 paisas, but old Shivrais, you could get 100. So you get those and distribute them. So this is, and then he showed me, he said, look, this, can you see this? This is Shiva and Shri Raja, Shiva, Chhatrapati or whatever. So I said, wow, this is, and of course Shivaji. So, it was in a typical Maharashtrian household. So that is how it all started. And then gradually, because I was interested in history as a subject anyway, I started getting drawn more into the value of coins as a source of history. What makes coins historical objects. So that's what, and I started reading more in 1984. There was one of the first major, we are in midst of a coin exhibition here. One of the first coin exhibitions that was held in the city was in 1984, and that was 2,500 years of Indian coinage that was then held at what was that in those days was called the Prince of Wales Museum, and now it's CSMVS, and it was in the Kumaraswamy Hall. So there that was the kind of first introduction to me. And then subsequently when I was doing my pharmaceutical, and of course I ended up in pharmacy. So when I was doing my pharmaceutical course, I started writing a few things here and there. There was a society of coin collectors in Mumbai at that time called Mudra Bharati. And they used to meet, again, this is like coming back to the same area. They used to meet in Baroda school on first Sunday of every month. And then there used to be a talk, and then they used to, there was a little bit of a gathering, as you know, people used to buy and sell coins at that time, and then they used to go and have cups of tea and then go home. So that is where I sort of got involved in the numismatic community, as it were, brotherhood of the city at that point. And then I thought, when I passed my course and I got a job, I really at one point discovered that I'm not enjoying this at all. I really enjoyed the course. I got good marks and everything. I got a campus placement. I got a quick job and everything. And I said, I really don't want to do this for rest of my life. So I said, I will, let's leave this and I'll go back to history, which was my love. And I thought, well, worst case scenario, I'll get a job in the university as a teacher. And I would, at that point, I would earn half what I was earning as a pharmaceutical executive. But in a way, I would even work half. It was like, so I said, that's a good compromise. At least I would do something which I love. So that is what happened. I must note that at this point, I was very lucky to have parents who actually allowed me to do everything that I wanted. They never restricted. I'm a single child. They could have focused all their ambitions on me and made a mess of my life, but they did not. So, and they let me do whatever I want. So I'm really grateful to have had these liberal kind of outlook, parents with liberal outlook. So that's how the shift happened. And then gradually I started getting more and more into the research aspect and more into the study of coins. And then I realized how much they can tell you about the history or practically anything for that matter, religion, everything. So that was the kind of the journey towards becoming a numismatist. There was one more thing that happened while I was still a collector, is when I was doing my master's, me and a dear friend of mine, we started moving around the country. And we, in about 3 years between, say, 1994 and 1996 or something like that, 1993 to 1996, we made about 20 journeys across the country. And those were the days before, the fast communication of WhatsApp and everything. So we went to various places. We didn't have a lot of money. So we had a railway timetable, which was called Newman's Indian Bradshaw, which listed every nooks and cranny of railways in it. So we used to just make an itinerary and just go, And we ended up in weird places. I mean, there was no reason for two middle-class Maharashtrian guys to end up in places like Sultanpur or Jaunpur And I really, really enjoyed that. And in retrospect, I think that gave me a real good grounding, not only about collecting, but also what exactly is the historical and numismatic landscape of our country? Who are the people from where coins come? What happens? What is their sort of genealogy? What is their antecedent kind of history? Where are they coming from? What is happening to them? What are their lives? And now, of course, an archaeologist talks about, nowadays the archaeologists talk about object histories, how does an object move and what lives it creates. So this is something that I got I think I was lucky, because I don't think nowadays it's possible. I think I was very lucky to actually have this kind of first-hand, grip or knowledge of the real sort of, ground level things that were going on. So that is. I mean, sorry, this is a very long answer to a rather small question.
It's interesting, many years ago, just as an anecdote, I was in Burhanpur and I met this gentleman who was a doctor, but who was a great collector of fractional Mughal coins. And I said, where do you find these coins sitting here in God-forsaken Burhanpur? He said, no, this was a very important place for the Mughals, And on both sides of the river, there were important, one had the fort, one had a town called Zainabad, which was actually where Mumtaz Mahal was buried. And that part obviously had a lot of nobility and other people. And there was a lot of campaigns into the Deccan and things like that. So there were people always digging their wealth into the ground and leaving it and then never coming back. And these people on the boat who would help you cross the Tapti River, every now and then some side of the river would fall and a hoard of coins would turn up. And these boatmen would bring it to this collector and some others like them. And they were innocent in the initial stages, and you could pick and choose what you wanted. Subsequently, they became a little bit of a union, and they also knew exactly, they were WhatsApp savvy now, you don't get a cheap deal. So this is how you get sometimes, in remote areas. So that brings me to the next question. Put numismatics in context for all of us. What does numismatics mean? Because for us, there's so much to the numismatics. But if you look at ancient India,
right?
What does numismatics mean?
So numismatics is, as everybody would know, is the science that is of studying ancient coins, really, in a single line thing. I would slightly modify that question, and I would broaden it not just to numismatics, but to a branch of history which is called monetary history. So, numismatics, pure numismatics, is all about coins. It's about studying coins and studying, their weights, diameters, measurements. So it's a science which is very heavy on the intrinsic kind of variety or the intrinsic aspects of coins. Whereas monetary history sort of let these kind of components expand into how money can be used as a source of historical evidence for a host of purposes. It could be economic history, it could be political history, it could be religious history, all sorts of things. So I would say that in a sort of very slightly contemptuous way, that I'm not really interested in real numismatics. If you ask me to weigh and measure coins, I get bored. It's the human side of it. It's the way that the stories that emerge out of it. I mean, this is a good example of the thing. So that is what really rocks my boat, as it were. And I would say that. So, coming back to your question about ancient India, so what do they do? So they are, as any sort of general student of history would know, they are one of the primary components, the primary evidences of history, primary material evidence of history, particularly with regard to Indian history. They are, because Indian history, the sources of Indian history are basically textual and material. In the material component, there are coins, inscriptions, and archaeology, and coins are one of the major things. The main advantage about coins is that each coin gives you a real snapshot of when it was manufactured. How long it remained in circulation is a different matter, but when it was struck, when it actually came into being, that is what the snapshot is. That's where the materiality of the coin sort of lies. And also because it's got some unique features around it. So it's not just a material object, it's also a functional object, and it's also a visual object. So it actually has something on it. It is used as something. It is used mainly as an object of exchange, of value exchange, or something like that. But the snapshot that it sort of offers you is something which is really very important, because there is hardly any other component of historical evidence that comes so close to the materiality in terms of its sort of contemporariness. It's almost that time. The coin is there. That's the thing that really is important. In case of ancient India, in a sort of historical sense, coins have contributed massively, as some people would know. It is they are how can I put it? It is really without those coins, particularly for certain periods, such as, say, for example, the 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD period, we would really not know anything about. We have very meager evidences. We have textual evidence which is kind of garbled in a way, so we had to be sifted properly because it was always transmitted as using the oral tradition, and it's got because of that it has got garbled. We have inscriptions, surely, but for particularly certain periods, like the one that I just mentioned, the inscriptional component is not that great. There are inscriptions, but they are like 300, 400, not more than 500 at the max. Whereas coins are just enormous. Like coins are constantly emerging, and the evidence value is just through sheer numbers is quite great. So without those, we would be in complete darkness about certain. And the classic example is, even major series like, say, Indo-Greeks. Before, I mean, Indo-Greeks, because of their Hellenic Greek connection, they are one of the earliest coins to be studied, that were studied in the evolution of Indian numismatics. And we would know, before the coins were studied and before they were sort of, systematically classified and everything, we knew of 2 or 3 kings. We knew of Menander because he was mentioned in the Buddhist text. We knew of somebody called Antiochus because there is one inscription in Vidisha that mentions him, and maybe, a couple of other examples. Only through the study and systematization of these coins, we now know nearly 30 kings. Now, that itself will then move on to, how do you place them, who comes first, what is dynastic order, and there are answers and methodologies provided by the bulk of coinage for each of these questions. How you use it, how you posit it, and how you analyze it is up to you. But the coins will have those components. Something similar happened to me when I was doing my thesis on, my PhD was on the coinage of the Satavahanas, which is again one of these kind of, ultra important dynasty. You go to any of the cave temples in the Deccan, it's the Deccan, the Satavahanas have made the Deccan, after the Mauryan period. So it's a really, really significant period in Deccan. It is also characterized by urbanization, spread of trade, emergence of urban centers and trading centers, all the coastal networks, that were trading with Rome, etc. So that is the period. But unfortunately, certain features of the coins were noted by previous historians, previous researchers, but they were not really utilized in the fashion. So when one has this data and one starts looking at this data and one starts to sort of extrapolate this data using certain methodologies, the wealth of information that you get is just enormous. It's incredible. And that's what is really the importance of the coins. Of course, there are intrinsic components of the coins, there are extrinsic components of the coins. The most important extrinsic component is its provenance, how it is found, how it is recovered. Is it an archaeological find? Is it found as a hoard? Is it found as a stray find? Is it found across the borders, as the global story of the rupee tells you? There are lots of these factors. So to decode coins, there are more than one methodologies. Some of them are extremely scientific. Some of them are extremely, if not scientific, they are at least based on, say, subjects like statistics, which have a scientific kind of way. Of course, there are purely scientific investigations such as, metallic analysis, for example, or analyzing the composition of the coin. There is something that one can learn about technology and technological advances, because they are actually functional, producing like shop floor objects that somebody was actually making them. So how does that happen? So those are the things. So there's a massive, and then of course there's the visuality. What does a coin show? Does it show a king? Does it show a deity? Does it have a symbol? What does it mean? And coins are very typical or very, very unique kind of objects because they are quite small. So whatever you have to tell through a coin, you have a very small area to express it. So how do you conceive your design program to actually give that message that the coin intends to give? And what are its sort of antecedents and ramifications as well? So there are these kind of very typical aspects that as a particular object that a coin possesses. And I would say that numismatics is a kind of a combination of it all, but then contextualizing that particular information with other branches of evidence, such as texts or anything, will sort of enrich the picture even better. It adds a certain level of granularity to what you do, and therefore I would say that even more exciting is the subject of monetary history. And this exhibition particularly is a reflection of that. It is not so much about studying coins for their actual numismatic worth. It is not about measuring, weighing, knowing because they're all silver anyway. But it is about a phenomenon that extends, beyond that, with the intrinsic varieties sort of spreading around it.
Yeah. So before we get to the journey of the rupee per se, I mean, there is, we as a culture are an oral culture. There are references to exchange and mediums of exchange and things like that. But as of now, most of the conventional wisdom says that our history on coinage per se starts somewhere around 600 BC, right? So what was happening before that? Was there evidence of a monetary history? And what is that?
There is evidence of metallic exchange. Let's put it this way. There are many references in, say, even texts like Rig Veda or Vedic texts. Of course, our sort of written or oral even history begins with that period. Of course, there is Indus Valley before that, but Indus Valley was a non-monetized civilization. They probably had grain, with which they were exchanging values and sort of exchanging surplus. But in the Vedic texts, you do start finding references for metal being used as a unit of value. So, I mean, at the base of it, there is this concept of value, which is a very abstract concept. And what is value? How do you define value? It's a very human and abstract concept. It is technically by monetary theory. It is explained in two ways. One is something which is credit based. So something that you do something for me and I have to pay you back. It is intangible, but I have to pay you back because you've done something for me. This is again goes into realms of psychiatry. And the other concept is that how do you do it? Because it's value based. So there is an asset. So there is an asset based money and there is a credit based money. So those are the kind of two major variations on the theme, as it were. So for asset-based money, we do have concepts of metals being used. So we have mentions of, say, words like hiranya, which means gold, or hiranya pinda, which is gold balls or gold nuggets. And there is also something specific, say, there are specific references of something called, say, nishka, which are always found in these. Now, there is a, in today's, particularly today's interpretative climate, there is always a run to say that everything is ancient, very much ancient. So these are even these mentions of metals being used are mentions of coins, but they are not mentions of coins, obviously, because by definition a coin is of course metallic, but it is a piece of metal which also has a indication of authority on it. So actually to say what that metal is worth and what is its purity or whatever, so it is an attested piece of metal. So unless you're sure of anything Vedic or anything Indus Valley or whatever turning up which is metallic, which does not have anything but just a piece of metal, it can't be a coin, because that's the definition of a coin, that it should have that particular feature on it. So I mean, I say that because not very long ago, 2 or 3 months ago, a very senior person from the Archaeological Survey of India gave a talk in Delhi about a hoard of diskettes, of gold diskettes that were discovered in a so-called Indus Valley site in Muzaffarnagar in UP, and he was saying that these are coins. And of course, Indus Valley people use coins, but they are not coins because they're just diskettes. They don't have any stamp or any authority of it. So of course, metallic money in metal form as unit of value is known from Babylonian times. So that is not something which is, unusual or rare. That is one of the ways that ancient cultures sort of quantified this abstract concept of value and started using it. They were using other things as well. In effect, anything can be money so long as the persons who are using it trust it. I could use this bottle of water as money because, if you accept it as money, I accept it as money, who's going to stop us? So anything can happen, anything can be money so long as it is trusted in that kind of 1:1 to make payments of various sorts. So that is what it is. So what happens around 600 BC? That's again a debatable date. I mean, one of the greatest joys of working on Indian numismatics is that everything is in flux. There is nothing particularly like firm. the entire chronology of pre-Buddhist, so pre-Mauryan India is based on 3 markers. One is the death of the nirvana of Buddha. The second is the appearance of Alexander, and the third is the date of Ashoka. And if any of these falls, then everything is, it upsets the apple cart. And it has already fallen because, there are people who are saying, accepted date of nirvana of Buddha is 486 BC. Now there are people who say that it was 386 BC. So now what do you do with this 100 years? So there are there are these questions, but by and large, hypothetically, around 5th century BC, this is what happens, that you get from excavated and hoard evidence, you find that there are metallic money like nuggets which do not have a stamp, and then there are nuggets which also have a stamp. So there is a transition that somebody is stepping in and putting a stamp of authority, and that's probably the beginning of Indian coins. Another sad thing really is that very little of this is archaeologically documented for various reasons. In that first cluster before the rupee, there is one of the oldest coins in Maharashtra. They're all found in the river, so there is not much of an archaeology there because there's not found. So how do we know that this is the earliest coin in Maharashtra? Because it has some features, and it is also because it fits widely into a particular kind of coinage that we know existed before the advent of the Magadhan Empire. So that's why we say that. Very little evidence is available in terms of real hardcore archaeological dating for any of this. Yeah. So everything has to function on a hypothetical basis. So long as the hypothesis works, is fine. So long as things start going a bit, awry, then then historians say, what do we do now? Let's revise it.
Okay, so before we come to the rupee specifically, we've got therefore a timeline, broadly speaking, of roughly 2000 years, right? So what was the monetary history of those 2000 in 5 minutes?
Ooh.
Before we come to the
that's quite challenging. Well, first of all, it depends on how you actually formulate this history. You can formulate it in vis-a-vis the known political developments in the country. You can formulate it with regard to certain evolution of certain technologies. So again, if you want to center on the manufacturing methods of coins, we know that the earliest coins were punch-marked, because they're called punch-marked because they are struck with small dies which are smaller than the flan or the shape of the size of the coin. So therefore they have a punch-marked appearance. From there onwards, we get into 2nd century BC, at around 2nd century BC, where you have coins which are struck with 2 pairs of dies, an upper die and a lower die, and it is sandwiched between the 2. And there is also a third method of producing coins, that is by casting. So you pour molten metal into a mold, and then you break the mold and you get a coin. So those are the ways of things. From a chronological or a dynastic political history point of view, you have coins of the Magadhan Empire, which then gradually disappears after the fall of after the death of Ashoka. And then you have the emergence of dynastic and non-dynastic coinages across the Indian subcontinent. And this is an interesting phase because it's the least researched phase of ancient Indian coins. You have localized coins of not so precious metals. This is what the real characteristic of coinage is in this phase. And it is most certainly it is linked with the urbanization that was happening across the country at this time. These are regional monetary systems which are fed by the emergence of cities and settlements in these regions, which are then producing these coins as economic or monetary instruments to cause exchange. Then you have a whole range of dynastic coinages, where you have, sometimes you know the names of the dynasties, such as Kushans, for example. Sometimes you don't, so you invent one for them. So you call them Indo-Parthians or whatever. You really don't know what, what the real name of that dynasty was, but it is Indo-Parthian, as we call it. And of course, then there are other little groups of kings which are in the Gangetic Valley who are kind of known by their names. So there are Mitra ending names, there are Datta ending names, there are Pala ending names, there are so on and so forth. Some of these kings actually are from what is politically incorrect word is tribes. And we don't use tribes anymore. I use the word Ganas, because they are basically peoples. They are not tribes in that sense. So they're issued by peoples of certain regions. We also have city-states, and this is another interesting thing, that we have city-states. We also have a few examples of coins which were issued by guilds, which are bodies of merchants which are effectively controlling that particular coinage. And you have, amongst the major dynasties of North India, you have Kushans, you have Guptas, and you have smaller dynasties such as the Maghas or anyone of that sort. In South India, you have again dynastical coinages. We have Satavahanas, you have Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, which are all the South Indian dynasties. After the fall of Guptas, the given wisdom mainly by Marxist historians is that coinage disappears. So there are no coins, and which numismatists have sort of pushed back that logic, saying that it was a dark feudal age, and it was a dark age, and there was no paucity of high silver, high value coinage was what they say. That was a kind of characteristic of the de-urbanization that happened in this time. None of this is true. There are plenty of coins, except that they are not attributable. And this is again, we're talking about coin collectors here. I'm sure you probably would like to expound on that later. But because they are not attributable, they were not collected. Because they were not collected, they did not end in museum collections. Because they were not in museum collections, there was a gap. A cabinet which says, Kushans, whatever, Guptas, and there's nothing. So therefore, what happens to coins after Guptas? Coins disappear. So the coins don't disappear. Coins are very much there. There are massive coinages out there. But it is very interesting that none of those coinages are very much attributable. So because collectors like attributable coins, they collected them, or they did not collect them. So that's the point. So there is a whole range of coinage in this period, which is basically sort of identified by the broad rubric of Indo-Sasanian coins, because they're sort of derived out of the Sasanian Iranian coin types, which were brought into North India by people like Huns, who sort of invaded the northern part of India. In the south, there is slightly different dynamic. The south is then dominated by gold. And between 7th century to 12th century, or even 14th century for that matter, the bulk of South Indian coins is of gold. And in a funny way, the technique of punch marking then sort of makes a reappearance in South, where it sort of in a sort of very funny regressive kind of way, because producing coins by punch mark is really labor intensive. I don't know why they opted for that, but for whatever reasons they did. So that is the things. And you have again in the later period, you also have dynastic coinages in South India. By the Cholas have a proper coinage, the Chalukyas, the Hoysalas, the Yadavas. So they have all their dynastic coinages. Most of these dynastic coinages from the south are not very well inscribed, so you cannot really quickly attribute them, but they have other features. So for example, they use dynastic emblems. So we know that this is a Chola coin or a sort of Pandya coin because it has a pair of fish on it. If you know that this is a Chalukyan coin because it is a boar on it, and so on and so forth. So that is the, I don't know, have I missed anything? Probably.
No, I think,
so in 5 minutes, crunching.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible landscape to unravel the politics of the times.
Yes.
And the geology of the time, because some of the, southern things can also be attributed to the tremendous amount of gold that was brought in from Rome also.
Yes. I mean, are you talking about William Dalrymple? I'm sorry, I don't really buy that logic very much, because we really don't know what were the indigenous supplies of gold doing. We have no idea of There is no data available for any of these gold. Where was it mined? I think that apart from imported coins, the mines in Kolar were very much, they were a major mine of gold in the south, and they must have been exploited, and that's why they are not that significant anymore, because they have been exhausted. So I presume, unless we have a proper data to facilitate these kind of, saying that where is the ore coming from, where is the coin coming from, and it's a very complicated thing, because coins always tend to get like metal always tends to get being recycled. So it is very difficult to say, even if the coin is a Chalukya coin, the gold in it might have come from somewhere else. There are methods. There are things like ore signatures that you find in of trace metal contents that you find in, and you can find out. But it's from a geological or a geographical viewpoint, it is really a very significant aspect.
Okay, that brings me to the rupee. 945 Hijri, 1538 to 39, Sher Shah Suri suddenly issues something that is officially, termed the rupee. And for the very first time, there is something out there which, is the precursor to all of this, right?
Yes.
What was the compulsion?
For that, we have to go slightly back, not slightly, 300 or 400 years back. And the real shift in using coinage, happens as the Delhi Sultanate starts establishing itself. And under the Delhi Sultanate, there is a conscious effort of linking fiscal policies to land use through metallic money. So these are the three components which the Delhi Sultanate sort of puts in place. There is a system called Iqta, by which people are given land rights to collect the revenue of that, keep a portion of that revenue for their own use, and then transmit the rest to. And we see that, we see the very clear references to this practice in certain coins of the Delhi Sultans, the early Delhi Sultans, such as Iltutmish. So these, you're talking about like early 13th century. And you have references in the coin inscriptions that says that this coin is struck from the land tax of certain province. So, so there is a direct connection between collecting revenue, paying troops, and monetization. And once you start get used to that kind of system, it's very convenient. It is quantifiable. It is very convenient. So everybody likes it. But then for that, you have to have a real supply for the raw metal, the content that these currencies are based on. What happens very interestingly is that in this time, there is silver coming in, local silver coming in, mainly from Afghanistan. And that sort of trickles. It's not that great supply. Main silver supply for the Indian subcontinent, there is not much local silver found within the subcontinent itself. So it has to be imported from somewhere. So that import is basically from China. And there is a very nice article by a very lovely monetary historian called John D.L., who talks about, it's called the China connection. So how the silver from, say, southern China, Yunnan, that kind of region, the hills, how that was being transported to Bengal. And so long as Bengal was firmly a part of the Delhi regime, there was this kind of influx. The moment Bengal starts becoming independent, the silver supply starts dwindling. And therefore, after, say, the reign of Muhammad Tughlaq, the silver in Delhi Sultanate coinage becomes almost none. And they evolve, of course, because coins are functional, people always work around these problems, and they evolve a very complicated system of debased currencies which have, variational values with each other. It works, but it is not as efficient. Now, Sher Shah basically comes into his own into Bihar. That is his kind of main part. And that is a part which is basically a part of Bengal Sultanate at that time. Curiously, for achieving smaller value transactions, there is no copper currency in Bengal. The Bengalis are using cowries, so there is this silver currency which is basically used for fiscal purposes, for paying troops, collecting revenues, that sort of thing. But for day-to-day transactions, the emphasis is on non-metallic currencies such as cowries. Now, what Sher Shah does at this time, you were asking about the compulsion. The compulsion was to actually, he was smart enough to understand that if you have a stable currency regime, a stable value system, it would be easier and more efficient and convenient to collect taxes. That was the main compulsion. Because if the values are varying, there would be an agency involved to attach to address that value. And that agency in most Indian cases was the sarafs, the money changers or whatever, that class of money professionals, as it were. They were mainly responsible for this. And it has been that dynamic between the ruling authorities and the sarafs, trying to sort of outmaneuver each other, has been there since time immemorial. And you get a lot of references, particularly in the European companies' accounts, of how powerful these sarafs were. So to avoid all this, he decided to create a currency which actually put a lower value component. Instead of using non-metallic media like cowries, he put a lower value component of copper. And he devised his currency of this exchange rate, which was 1 tola of silver was equivalent, 1 tola of one coin of 1 tola of silver was equivalent to 40 coins of 20 grams each of copper. And that copper he originally sourced from the mines in Bihar. So that is where the rupee was born. So that particular value system that he created, and of course, as he moved westwards, chasing Humayun off and ultimately pushing him across to Iran, he moved westwards. He also had access to one of the richest sources of copper was the copper mines in Rajasthan. So they also came under his purview. So the Vindhya and the Aravalli copper producing belt, not just the northern Bihar Himalayan foothills copper producing belt, and therefore he was able to institute this coinage. The third thing that he did was, of course, that people needed these coins so they could go to a mint. So establish mints across all the kingdom. So the genesis, the birth of the rupee, as it were, although it is attributed to Sher Shah, it is a culmination of many economic and metallurgical and value-based factors that sort of form at this time through the reforms of currency that were instituted by Sher Shah. So this is what makes a rupee, this is what makes the rupee come to birth, as it were. So.
Okay, and not so insignificant question, why call it rupee?
Why call it rupee is a good question, because that word, actually, we don't find any reference to Sher Shah using that word himself. That the reference is post facto, and that reference is from Ain-e-Akbari, and that is the text that was written by Abul Fazl, which is kind of describes the statecraft of Akbar's time. It's not that far from Sher Shah. It's about 30-40 years after. It's not that within probably a generation kind of thing. And that is where you get the mention of the rupee. And he says that there is a coin which is a silver coin which is called rupiah, and it was instituted by Sher Khan. Of course, they didn't call Sher Shah Shah, because Shah is they call it the lower pejorative of Khan. So he was the Sher Khan actually instituted this. So this is where we find the word rupiah. And etymologically, it can be derived from two sources. So there is one source which means raupya, which is the Sanskrit word for silver. And there is a word called rupyaka that you find in earlier mentions. But that is, from its occurrence, it looks like it is used for any silver coin. It's not, obviously, we know. There is no reference that it was 1 tola in weight.
Rup dena.
No, rupyaka. It's basically anything which was based on silver.
Okay.
So rupya, raupya are words denoting, and rup dena is the second etymology, which means something that has a form and something which is struck. So it can be derived both ways. Rupyaka, the word Rupyaka is currently featuring on our banknotes as a sort of pseudo-Sanskrit word for the rupee. Although it is known as a Sanskrit word even before the advent of the rupee, started meaning rupees only after, when the rupees were invented. So those are the kind of two etymological things.
So, in effect, the proliferation would be attributed to the Mughals?
Yeah, I mean, what happens after Sher Shah starts it, it spreads across his empire. The Mughals then boot him out, and Humayun returns. The Mughals are Central Asian, so they have their own monetary system, and their silver coin. They also have silver coins, but their silver coin is based on a standard of 4.5 grams. It is not a tola standard. It is not 11.6 grams. It is 4.5 grams, 4.6 grams. And what happens is that when they come back, they start issuing. Before Sher Shah, they have already struck coins in northern India to that standard. Then Sher Shah comes and revives the entire, reforms the entire currency system, goes away. The Mughals come back and they think that this is a good thing. So they don't go back to their, the Central Asian coinage system that they had been familiar with. They stick to Sher Shah's reforms. And that is something which is quite sagacious. That is something that maybe Akbar does at a very young age. Maybe that was his kind of spark that he was a clever man. So that is something that they do. And that then sort of, changes the entire thing, because subsequently for the next 100 or so years, when the empire expands, they go on making this kind of into a machine where they have local sources of silver, local sources of copper. They go on establishing mints wherever they go. They start, producing coinage for people to use, but to also regulate the revenue collecting systems, particularly for provinces which they capture, from the existing sultanates. So there is a kind of a adoption of this rupee by the Mughals that makes it great. I mean, on British television, we have a program called, and there are also books which say, what did the Greeks do for us? What did the Romans do for us? What did the Egyptians do for us? Blah, blah, blah. So what did the Mughals do for us? They gave us the rupee. So, so that is quite clearly, it's a Mughal legacy in more than one ways.
So it's interesting, because if you look at the journey, there was obviously, as the empire expanded, it was, the sovereign power. We will do this in this particular area. There were, people who were subsumed into the empire. They, kind of converted. But there were a whole bunch of people at the periphery who never changed, like in the south, for example, or even in the west in Gujarat, and the Khadi continued, So, is this only about politics and the expansion? That
it's about both. It's about, as I said, coins are functional. So because they're functional, they breed their own sort of tradition. And the invention and the continuation of coinage tradition is a subject within numismatic by itself. Like what is the coinage tradition, and how it is, how do people make sense of it, and how do people use it? So what prevails is a complicated question. It's not just the powers to be, as it were. Obviously, the rupee becomes a denomination of a power construct. So, for example, we know that in our text we have said that the southernmost Mughal rupee, Mughal mint to strike rupee was Tiruchirappalli. And what prompted those rupees to be struck in Tiruchirappalli was actually a political intrigue, where the ruling queen, who was from the Nayaka household, was threatened by the Mughals and asked to pay a tribute. So she then they strike the rupees for her, and then she gives them back. So it's very clearly that the rupees are made by the Mughals, because they're products of a Mughal mint, very clearly. But the context of it is being paid as tribute. So it tells us very clearly that the Mughals, when they wanted to have this kind of power relations or having a tribute or something, they always preferred the rupee. So there was that. The same thing happens at the other end of the country in Ladakh. So when Aurangzeb marches, one of the Aurangzeb's generals marches into Ladakh, he threatens the king, who's called a Chogyal at that time. The Chogyal then responds by saying, okay, we'll strike coins in your name. He doesn't strike the coins. The Mughal Mint, actually, the Mughal atelier that is traveling, the artists that are there with the Mughal army, they design it. He has to buy them and they give them back. So basically those are the denominations that the Mughals always used. So there is a kind of a political layer, as well as there is a functionality layer. So the people who are the currencies which are on the fringe, as you say, which do not change, they do change in a little way, but the change is not that, it's more of an instance rather than an incident rather than a proper kind of currency. So to cut a long story very short, it's the combination of both. It's the combination of changing coins and exerting authority, and whatever the prevalent collecting practices. I think we are getting a sign there.
Okay, one or two quick questions. In this journey, before you hit the Raj and the Republic, which is the second last one, there's the ups and downs.
Yes.
So can you quickly give us this journey?
Yes,
because it's very important.
You guys are here and you probably will like to see this afterwards, and maybe it's going to be open for 3 months. So the curatorial vision behind this is to tell the story of the rupee from its inception. This cluster is not really part of the story. It's just an antecedent. It's a preamble. The real story begins with that cluster, and there are 7 clusters all around you. So first is what we just talked about. How did Sher Shah? What did the coins look like? And the Mughals. Then, as the Mughals, the empire starts unraveling, a lot of indigenous authorities, as well as the factions within the Mughal courts who become independent, as well as the third party which is in the political fray at that time is the mercantile companies, the Dutch, the British, the French, etc. They all start issuing the rupees. So from the bulwark or the edifice of the Mughal rupee, single Mughal rupee, you get a fragmentation. Much as the empire fragments, you get a fragmentation. So from 1 rupee, you go to many rupees. Now, in that particular phase, which carries on in a little way for later on as well, how does one tell? How does one know that this is a French rupee and this is a British rupee, or this is a Mughal rupee, or this is Nawab's rupee, or whatever Maratha? So there are the main defining characteristic of 18th century Indian coins is the appearance of symbols. So there are little markers that people place on the coins which tell you what they are. And so there's a kind of a decoding, kind of deciphering that one requires to do it. And that is a very interesting aspect, because how do these symbols appear? What are their contents? What do they convey? It also breeds a whole range of nomenclature. These coins start to get identified by these symbols. So for example, if it has a coin has a fish symbol on it, it's called machlidar or whatever. So those are the kind of things. So that is a very interesting aspect of that. And ultimately, when the colonial powers, then particularly the British, when they become successful, their main aim is to consolidate everything. Because you inherited an empire. How do you make it work? You consolidate it. So they try to make back to 1 rupee. So that is the next story. So from 1 to many, and then from many to 1. So that is what then happens. And in that effort, they end up launching a single currency in parts which are under their direct control, which are the 3 presidencies, Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. Those were the 3 presidencies. But there is a whole other part of India which were not under their direct control, which was the princely India. And there they carry on issuing their own rupees. So the consolidation that the British try to achieve is not really complete just by political consolidation. It also breeds to these other categories. So that's the next cluster. So, the princely rupees. And again, there are peculiarities. Just like the 18th century coins have a peculiar feature, like the symbols, etc. Those symbols then carry on with the princely rupees. But there's also a feature about, if you are a king, which is not really independent, how do you express the paramountcy? So you either express it by explicit, subservience, saying you're great, fine. And you see there's a picture of the Maharaja of Rewa there, who's a very interesting character. Unfortunately, the coin is not, he issued only copper coins, so this was not part of the story of the rupee per se. But that guy, because Lord Dalhousie, as everybody knows, was sacking right, left and center all their kingdoms under various pretexts, he was so afraid, like he was so anxious about it. So he said, I really want to, stop using I want to acknowledge the British paramount power on my coins. Being bureaucratic, his political agent said, sorry, sir, we have to send this question to Calcutta and then they will reply back. So he says, how much time is it going to take? He says, about 4 or 5 months. He said, no, I don't want to stop. Carry on. Then he strikes the coins in the name of the political agent. So the coins that he strikes have on one side his name and the other side says Agent Bushby Sahib. Bushby was the name of the political agent. His name was George Alexander Bushby. So that's suddenly this guy gets mentioned. Who's just a political agent. He gets a mention on a coin. So those are the peculiar things. So how do other states respond? So the one easiest way is that coins have two sides, thankfully. So on one side you have the coin struck in the name of the ruling king. On the other side you acknowledge the British paramount power. You say Victoria or whatever. You have the second way is to actually make an oblique reference. So, for example, macho states like Udaipur, for example, they say we don't want to actually mention the name of the British monarch, but we'll say something else. So we say, oh, this. So on Udaipur coins, you find the phrase "Friend of London." So they call themselves Friends of London in that way. And the third way is to completely ignore the paramount power. And that also happens. It's most commonly happens with Maratha states. So the Gaikwads, the Holkars, and the Scindias strike coins only on them. They never acknowledge anybody else on them. And of course, these are sticking points, and there are various dynamics for power that sort of emerge out of this as well. So that's the story of the princely rupees. And the last, before we come to the 19th and 20th century, that becomes, that is a very fairly straightforward story of how the British and how the British coinage in India starts and how that then sort of leads to the coinage of Republic of India.
Okay. And this last bit, which I think is also an equally fascinating part,
yes,
is the journey of the rupee from its origin to its replication as a unit with the same terminologies or associated terminology in such a vast part of the world. All of Eastern Africa, Southern Arabia, the Middle East, a lot of Persia, and even up into
and
Georgia.
East Asia, and Southeast Asia. Yeah.
And, if you see this particular coin here, this is issued in
1740 timeline.
Yeah, this one. This is actually a rupee issued in Tbilisi in Georgia. So, that's this part. So that's one aspect. And then geographically on the other aspect, all the way to literally western parts of present-day Papua New Guinea. You had rupees and little satraps in the middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean. They were also issuing rupees. Part of it was trade and part of it was conquest. Would you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, trade is, of course, the major part, and conquest is slightly minor part. The conquest part is easier because, it happened only with Nadir Shah. And, Nadir Shah famously looted Delhi in 1739. And he went back with so many rupees that he transformed the currency system of his own kingdom on the rupee standard. Because before his campaign on India, the currency picture in Iran, Persia, was fragmented in a regional sense because the different regions had different standards of coinage. So he found his so many rupees. So he then just he did almost like a Sher Shah 2.0. He changed the currency system onto the rupee. And then because his empire extended all the way to, the shores of the Caspian Sea, those were the westernmost or northernmost, if you see, latitudinally or longitudinally, whatever. Those are the farthest in that direction mints that struck the rupee. In trade forms, there were two options. There were two sort of worlds of the rupee that emerged. One was the world that emerged out of trade contacts involving European mercantile companies, and that is mainly to the southeast. So when the Dutch started trading with Indian coast, and they also had control over Southeast Asia in Indonesia, they took the Mughal rupees, because the Mughal rupees was paragon of standard, because the Mughal mints were so efficiently controlled that their products were trusted for their quality by everyone. So therefore they thought this is a good way of taking a trusted currency all the way to Java, and they started using the Mughal rupees that were taken there by trade by using a counter stamp on it. So they actually stamped it with something, a word or a symbol, and they started using them locally.
Example there.
There's an example there in the case. So that's where sort of from Sri Lanka onwards to that part. On the other side of the story, those trade networks between western coast of India and Africa actually go back a long way. They are not the products of European mercantile interventions. They go back. I mean, the story is that when Vasco da Gama came to Calicut, the person who guided him from east coast of Africa back to Calicut was an Indian sailor. So the Indian sailors had been plying these area for a long time, and unfortunately, we do not have a proper documentary evidence for this, because they were more or less traditional, desi kind of exchanges. Whereas the ones that were the mercantile exchanges for the East, because they were done by companies, there you have proper documentation. So when the colonization of Africa happens in the late 19th century, the existing, the emerging colonial powers in Africa, when they want to strike the coins that actually could be fed into the interiors as well, they choose the rupee. So you have examples of Italian rupees, you have examples of German rupees, you have British rupees in Mombasa, and you also have Portuguese rupees in Mozambique. So you have all these people issuing rupees in this fashion. A tiny bit of connection also happens over land in trade. So for example, you have an example of the Tibetan plateau, which were using British rupees as the trade currency. And for trading for tea with Tibet, the preferred mode being British rupees, a copy of the British rupee was also struck in Yunnan and Sichuan in South China. And there they actually put the picture of the Chinese emperor there, but it is modeled on the picture of Queen Victoria. So from an Indian perspective, it looks like Victoria gone Mandarin. So yeah, so
they also have an example.
There's an example there. So those are the kind of examples that overland trade was also. And this is the most fascinating story. There's a very interesting story. We'll run out of time otherwise. There's a very fascinating story of how this is again a unique incidence. No other central bank in India has ever done this before. Reserve Bank of India in 1959 issued a special set of notes of its own rupees to circulate only in the Gulf. And they were called as external rupees. And this is again, which is a unique thing. Why that was done is a fascinating story. It was done essentially to control gold smuggling. And it wasn't that successful because in the 60s, unfortunately, the financial situation of India was not that great. In 1966, we had a devaluation of the rupee by about 15% or something, which was quite drastic. And therefore, and at the same time, the Gulf countries which were using the Indian rupee as a legal tender also started striking oil. So they had their asset to base their currencies on, and therefore they started issuing their own national currencies, as it were, and they stopped one by one the use of Indian rupee as a legal tender. The last country to stop it was 1972 Muscat, as in Oman. So that it was used as legal tender until 1972 in Oman. So that's
interestingly, they had a unique color in the series.
Yes, the notes that were used as external had the same designs, but they had a different color. and the promise text has a little change. It says payable only at the issue of office in Bombay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So in fact, there are many, side stories associated with that. I mean, you have the brass token, which was, equivalent of a rupee issued by the Raja of Harsil, which is...
who was a timber merchant called H.H. Wilson and H.N. Wilson, sorry.
Yeah.
And he was called Pahadi Wilson because he was, trading in timber and he sort of created his own kingdom. And of course, you have also, we don't have an example of that, but in the interactive map, you can see that there is a mention of this strange Scottish guy called Cluny's Ross, who owned an atoll,
Yeah.
which is called Cocos-Keeling Islands, which is middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean, and he sort of established his kingdom there and started issuing his own rupees. About 600 people population or
600,
something.
yeah.
Something, and this is again a fascinating story. So you have lots of collaterals in this exhibition. You have, thankfully, thanks to their system, you have all these little iPads with headphones, and you can play with them and actually learn some of these tangential stories. There's a very interesting story somewhere down there about how the British started using coins in Bombay as well,
Yeah.
and what happened because in a nutshell, the British did not have the permission to actually strike coins in the name of the Mughal emperor. So they started issuing coins. You can see an example up there, 1672, which had Latin inscriptions on them. So they were not readily acceptable because people just didn't understand what's going on. They were familiar with Mughal coins. So as a kind of compromise, a stealth compromise, they started issuing coins with Farsi inscriptions bearing the name of their kings, which was William and Mary. And this was then discovered by Aurangzeb, and what happens is quite interesting. So,
in fact, we have Dr. Garg here, who's written a wonderful article on
absolutely
on all the mercenary, foreigners who had issued coins.
Yes, and we have some examples of those as well.
Yeah, it's just fascinating, the kind of, the guys who were here, some renegade guys like Jan Willem Hessing in Agra, and Jean-Baptiste Philos in Gwalior.
And Begum Samru, of course. So there are these, some very important coins.
Yeah. Okay, but we don't have time, and I think we need to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions. And I'm sure there will be others in this group here who are also able to weigh in on some of these discussions. So, yes, Bittu.
What was the relationship between the stamping of coins and barter? Was there any conflict, like serious conflict?
No, I don't think there was a serious conflict. There were, the thing is that coins were used in certain registers. So for certain purposes, people preferred to use coins, and for certain purposes, people tried to sort of deal with barter. And for barter, there were sort of specific non-metallic currencies which were going around. So there was basically suparis, and bitter almonds and cowries. Those were the three main non-metallic currencies that were being used as units of value. Of course, there was a kind of, at one point, non-metallic becomes metal, because at some point, a certain quantity of cowries or whatever it is convertible into a metal, a coin of some metal. So that is that. But there is no, I don't think there is any conflict per se, but there is certainly, I know that you are an ecologist. So there is a very interesting ecological dimension there, and that is fascinating how ecologically currencies emerge. The objects which are used for transactions have an ecological impact as well, that is then turned into a financial impact. So for example, all the cowries that were coming in were mainly produced in the Maldives. And there are fascinating accounts of cowrie farms in Maldives. How did people grow cowries? So there's an account of coconut fronds. Yeah, coconut leaves. They take the entire leaf and they immerse it into a lagoon, where the cowries then attach themselves at the back of these coconut leaves, and then they pull it out and then they harvest the cowries. What happens, as I said, the major bulk of currency cowries being used in India was in Bengal. When the British occupy Bengal in the 1780s, particularly, they tried to institute a copper currency there after about 800 years. So there is no tradition of copper currency in Bengal for a long time before the British take over. But for that, they have to stop them using cowries. So what they do is that they intentionally divert the supply of cowries to West Africa, where they're preferred by the Ashanti kings and peoples, where they are exchanged for gold. So the British institute a copper currency in Bengal, divert the cowries to West Africa, get exchanged for gold, and make money at both ends. So it's a fascinating story of ecological changes and changes in habitat kind of creation, how they affect financial things. So
there was this thing where taxes were charged. So ABBA, the group, got shiploads of wheat, and they kept paying taxes. They buy wheat.
Yeah. I mean, yes, that's what. I mean, we don't have direct examples of that, but I'm sure such practices there.
But it's interesting. There are so many little anecdotes. I mean, for example, while we were doing research, there are countries in Africa, in the African coast, who were not accepting the or producing the rupee, like Ethiopia. And we have documents which are found in the Qatar archives, which say that there's a British guy who's written to his boss here in Mumbai, saying, I'm gun running, I'm sourcing guns from the tribes in Ethiopia, and the Bagas are very, mean, because they want, for every gun worth $15, they want $2.50 or $2 as commission. And they want that in rupees, because they don't trust any other currency. And of course, there's a lovely story of the thaler.
Yes. I mean, that's not a story about the rupee, but there was a popular coin in the Horn of Africa region, which was an Austrian coin. And the story is that because there was the Queen of Austria, Maria Theresa, was shown with a little bit of her bust being visible. That was kind of the impetus for having an extra, and it was a very popular trade coin. So in 20th century, in 1920s and 30s, a very enterprising guy, called Antonin Bess, he suggests to Royal Mint that, there is a straight 8% profit to be made in this trade. We just have to make this coin and supply it to them because they want it. What's wrong? They said, it's an Austrian coin. We can't really supply it. No, the Austrian coin is a Habsburg coin. We are in 1930s. Habsburg got over a long time ago. It's a coin dated 1780. Just strike that. So he persuades Royal Mint to strike that. Then they do. During the Second World War, the supply from Royal Mint is disrupted. So they move entire production to Bombay Mint. And then it sort of goes from, there to there. And, he gets his money, and he's a wheeler dealer, basically. He gets, towards the end of his life, he endows a college in Oxford, as they do, St. Anthony's. So, and, but those of you who have read Tintin, there is a character called Senor Oliveira de Figueira. He is based on him. So, yeah. And to bring the story very close to home, in Antonin Bess's empire in Aden, who was his employee? Dhirubhai Ambani. So it's a very fascinating story that is linked to a coin that goes around in this fashion. So.
It just happened across the road, literally, here in Bombay.
So we are right next to it.
There is a question at the back.
I'd like to ask you, when did it first start on the coin, making sure the rupee is debased by the English?
What is the point?
I think he was asking about, sorry, can you repeat please? Sorry. Just to get it right.
All coins are printed of valuable metal were all things debased by the English.
The clipping was not, it was definitely a problem in European countries much more than it was in India. And that is primarily because Indian coins, rupees particularly, are quite thick. Whereas European coins were thin. So it was easier to clip European coins, and that was a much more prevalent problem in Europe than it was ever in India. But to stop clipping, obviously the main feature that one could add was something to do with the edge. So you put milling. And you do have examples of the earliest milled coinages that appear, and it was Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan actually instituted a method by which his coins had a sort of milling on its edge.
But it's not that there was no contemporary attempts to forge and all that.
Oh, God,
Because a lot of the
absolutely, yeah.
Medieval coins have shroff marks, where
Yeah.
people are still not believing that this is
So people
silver
used to get
plated.
coins attested, because to check whether they're genuine or not. In fact, Maratha documents tell me that if the coin is actually without a shroff mark, it would not also be trusted.
Jason, sorry, just to add that, then you have got the concept of Bhatta,
Yes,
which I have covered in that.
yes, yes.
Along with the British, we also had the French and the Portuguese. So, what were the currencies in Goa and Pondicherry, and what were the exchange rates?
To start with, they've had their original currencies. So, for example, in Portuguese are a different ball game altogether because they were not a mercantile company. So they regarded Goa as part of Portugal, right? So they had basically their currency system in Goa to start with was kind of based as a kind of amalgamation of both the currency systems. And when Alfonso de Albuquerque conquered Goa in 1510, the earliest coins he struck were actually to the local South Indian standard of pounds. So it was like 3.5 grams and double of that. So those were the kind of denominations that he used. In 1650-ish, we don't know exactly, but around 1650, the Portuguese start issuing their own rupees as well, but they don't call it rupees, they call it sharafins. Sharafins. So, which is spelled with an X, so zerafins. Yeah, so, yeah. And the pronunciation of that word is sharafin. So, and it is actually a corruption of the word ashrafi. So that's where it comes from. So ashrafi is a gold coin, but they use it for silver coins. The French also originally start issuing coins in the South Indian system of fanons and caches and doudous, but then subsequently from 1735, something or thereabouts, they get a permission to strike coins of the Mughal type from the Nawab of our court. So the idea for everyone is to strike a rupee. There is nothing like the rupee is paramount. So everybody wants to strike a rupee, but there are complications in which they can or they cannot, or when they do.
That's of course the Portuguese, because they had access to Malacca and all, they also then started to bring in other metals and started to
So there was pewter and zinc and tin. So that was all coming from those parts of the world. And we also had in 18th century, I mean, I won't go into details about this, but in 18th century, there is a sort of a copper famine. Until 1770s, copper sort of gets reduced, in use, and it's, the price of copper increases. So it is profitable or beneficial for these guys to actually stop using copper coins and use some other metal. So there's a whole range of tin and zinc coins that are produced in Bombay at that time, and also in Goa and Vasai.
But how valuable were those metals?
If
what were they used for using copper?
whatever the value was, because they are much heavier. So obviously they were cheaper than copper, but that means that they were heavier coins for the same value. So
now somebody had put up a hand right at the end. Yeah. No, at the end there. I saw a hand going up. Yeah, welcome.
Would you be able to elaborate a bit on the role of the shroffs?
I can elaborate, but it's the subject of a book. So I guess the shroffs are a very interesting category. Then I'm afraid not a lot about them has been written. To historicize them is not a subject, not a feat that has happened. But they are extremely, extremely important because they control the issue in most cases because they have wealthy. They also carry licenses to strike coins. They are dealing in coins, so they have this whole concept of bata that Varsha mentioned. So they are in charge of actually rendering the coins circulatable, if there is a word like that. So they were doing that. So they were actually using their skills to produce discounts, and they were also recycling. So they were also responsible for running the mints where coins would be recycled. So they have a really big cloud, and they are a community which forms nexuses quite easily. And you find references to these nexuses quite happily in many of the works of, say, the archives of the companies, for example. So, because the Mughals were so keen on having their rupee, and that was basically because the Mughals wanted to have the name of their king on their coins. And that is because to have the name of the king on the coin is a prerequisite for the Islamic concept of kingship. The king is a king because he has his name on his coins. So it was very important for the kings to have their coins. So therefore, all the bullion that was coming in, say in a port like Surat, was being converted into rupees. And the mints were sort of, they had their own ways of, and these guys were time bound. Say ships were coming on the monsoons. So, to go back, to return, they have to finish their business and go back, and it was quite important for them to, to complete that cycle. And there are umpteen number of references where shops are being cursed by having these, hands in gloves with the mint master, saying that, they know how to pester these people and get extra money out of them. So, and that sort of then increases, there are many such stories. They demand, they say that we want certain kinds of coins and you only have to produce this. For example, as late as 1825, there is a mint the mint in Calcutta strikes rupees for Madras having a different symbol because the shops want it that way. So they command a lot of clout in their own ways.
Also about, sorry.
Hi, I had like two short questions. Like one, when we think of rupee, we think of the metal silver, right? Were there any other metals that rupee was minted in, like gold? And if they did, what was the reason? Like, was it traded in particular communities? One, that. And second, I spot the name of Noor Jahan. So do we have any other women queens whose rupees were minted? Thank you.
There are, I will take the second question first. There are many queens. We have a rupee of Razia here as well. So there is Noor Jahan, there is Razia, there is in Travancore, there is Gauri Parvati Bai, and all sorts of host of
Begums
queens.
of Bhopal.
The Begums of Bhopal, there is Begum Samru there. So there are many queens or many female issuers of coins in as well. The first question is, yes, there are gold rupees, but because 10 silver rupees or 12 silver rupees or even 15 silver rupees made a 1 gold rupee, the size of the coin, which is 1 rupee in gold, is quite tiny. And there are examples of such coins being struck for various reasons. So for example, there is a gold rupee that was struck in Bombay by the East India Company because they did not have proper silver. And the main reason is that they don't have silver. So the other example which we were talking about in the morning is during the final Anglo-Sikh war in Multan, the city of Multan was sieged. So besieged by the British troops. And there was a guy called Mulraj, who was a diwan in Multan, who had gold but he had no silver. So he struck rupees of gold, which are quite small, to pay for his troops.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I just... Hi.
No, for the recording purpose.
Not very comfortable with this. Okay. I have one comment, observation, and one question, or maybe two questions. I think yesterday when you mentioned that, when you look at the coin, if you don't know anything around it, it's just a coin, just a piece of metal. But then when it starts talking to you is when it makes a lot of sense, right? So I thought that really, I took that comment back home. And when you said the side stories and the human stories around the coins today, I think that was really fascinating. So thank you so much for that. The question was, I mean, and to the audience, which is extremely erudite, I guess, in terms of coins and numismatics, etc. I'm a complete outsider, so please pardon my silly question. In the evolution, or I don't know, the scale of antiquity, where do you put the rupee as a currency? Is it the oldest currency in the world, or other currencies before?
No, it's certainly not the oldest currency in the world.
Okay, so where do you put it in the scale?
Well, 1538.
Yeah, but then which were the others? Like, how would you sort of?
And there are other silver currencies. For example, in the south you have the panams, which are
worldwide. That's how
the Romans were there.
Yeah,
the
Romans
Greeks
were
there.
Okay, so the Roman currency.
All issuing.
Absolutely. So they were all issuing. The history of silver coins in the world goes back to about 5th century BC.
So the Greek drachma, for example, is a very ancient. Denarius, the Roman. So they're all 2,000, 1,500 years old. So way before. The rupee is only 1530. Relatively new.
Relatively new. Yeah.
The fascinating part is this part. How it evolved from one to many, back to one to many, and then international.
So actually the sub-question that I had was more related to this one. That so it really expanded, like the rupee really went across quite a few regions of the world. So at what point did it lose? I mean, now we know the value of the rupee, the way it is today. So at what point did it sort of start losing its importance?
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. One is sort of international pressures. So the first international pressure was the Second World War. And that is the time when we had, in 1939, we had the last of the full silver rupees. And these, in 20th century, mainly First World War and Second World War, these were the two major global events that made a lot of countries move to a regime of token currencies. Currently the money in your pocket, the coin in your pocket is not worth 1 rupee per se. You believe it's 1 rupee because it's government regulated.
Right.
Yeah. The actual worth of the coin is 5 paisa or 10 paisa or whatever the metal worth. The currencies before the 20th century were largely real currencies. So their value was based on the contents that they carried. So one is that reason. The other reason is also inflation. So if at all. The main reason for disappearance of coins of certain denominations is because of inflation. So, and as inflation eats away the value of the coin, it's very important that the value of the coin in metal terms is kept well below its circulatory value. Because if it exceeds the circulatory value, people will use it for something else. And that has happened in India. We had a 20 paisa coin with a lotus on it in 1960s and 70s. It was brass, nickel brass. The moment the price of the brass goes on increasing, people start taking those coins, making jewelry, etc. So that is what the real reason is. So that is the pressure. So because inflation eats into the value of these coins, the task to keep them below that threshold becomes difficult. And therefore it is better to stop them. So therefore, we've already lost 25 paisa, 50 paisa.
Right.
I don't know how long the rupee will last as a coin.
Even the 5 paisa, 10 paisa at one point
5 paisa and 10 paisa are long gone.
Back,
are long gone. But 50 paisa was
of course
quite recently stopped.
Okay. But also, I guess, what has happened, it's also linked, some of the international part of it is also linked to the, kind of regression of the colonial part. So their ability to influence in the colonies disappeared, and most of those independence movements asserted themselves. And one of the biggest things, in fact, if you go to the case of Indonesia, when the Dutch and the Indonesian population was, kind of trying to assert itself, they said we want the rupiah, because for some strange reason they associated the rupiah with nationalism. The Dutch were trying to push for the guilder. And when the Japanese invaded Indonesia, they actually issued the rupiah as invasion money for use
As Japanese currency, yeah.
as Japanese currency in Indonesia. And the reason they said rupiah was to kind of curry favor with the local population because they preferred that politically. So, you know, it's quite interesting that way.
Yeah.
Some of the dynamics.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
Thank you. When you say all these different governments from the time of the Mughals until, you know, even these colonial African governments or the Japanese are issuing rupees, are they always just in name only, like rupees, or are they attempting to be pegged to the value of the kind of standard rupee, or are some like central rupee issuing government giving them permission to issue rupees? And if so, is there like some monetary control that the Mughals or the British are enforcing on all these different issuers to like try to prevent inflation?
That's a very complicated question because it's a mixture of everything. It's a mixture of many aspects of why certain currencies gain popularity. I think the main reason why the rupee was popular was also because in its first avatar as the Mughal currency, it was very trustworthy. So that sort of breeds various activities, you know, and various traditions around it. You know, trust is a very strange thing. You know, once you have it, it's very difficult to lose it, and once you lost it, it's very difficult to regain. So that is a particular. It's a sort of a human aspect to it. I think the Japanese and other countries that were issuing the rupees was essentially because it was already prevalent. You know, it was rooted in the tradition already for 200 years or so, and therefore they sort of took it on to start with.
So it's just a bill with the name rupee.
Yeah.
But nothing related to the actual. They're not trying to say it's the same value.
But if you look at Indonesian monetary history, there came a point where the Indonesian government said, you know, we have even run out of paper to print.
Because it was so inflated. Yeah.
So every state was issuing their own rupee.
Yeah.
And some of those papers, we have a few samples which we could do, you know, walkthroughs about, are like literally scraps. You know, they're so bad, you know, in terms of the quality. So,
Right. I think we should stop now.
Yeah. So I think, you can, you know.
Would anybody, is Komal doing the...
Yeah, Komal, you want to do a
closing?
Yeah, Pooja.
Yeah, Pooja.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you Paul and Shailendra. Please scan the QR and please join us for our other program as well. We have some really exciting programs for the upcoming weekends. The upcoming weekends will have Paul's Curator walkthrough, and also we have something special for children's weekend as well, so please join us for that. And we have some refreshments for you all, so before you head off, please have them as well. Yeah, thank you.